I want you to picture a strange moment in history. America's oldest allies are not uniting with the United States, they're uniting against it. I've covered global power shifts for decades. Usually, alliances fracture under pressure from rivals, from Russia, from China. But in 2026, something unprecedented is happening. The pressure is coming from Washington itself. France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Poland, Spain, Denmark, they are issuing joint warnings to the United States about sovereignty and international law. At the United Nations, America is being rebuked not by enemies, but by friends. Intelligence sharing is being cut, military cooperation is being scaled back, and for the first time, US allies are openly asking whether America has become a risk. If this feels shocking, it shouldn't, because systems don't collapse overnight. They erode decision by decision. If you want to understand how global leadership is really lost, stay with me. And if this kind of analysis matters to you, this is the moment to pay attention. Because to understand where the world is going, we first have to face what America has become. Let's be precise about what this moment actually represents. This is not a disagreement over policy. It is not a temporary clash of interests. What we are witnessing is something deeper, a rupture in shared assumptions. For decades, America's alliances were built on more than power. They were built on predictability, on restraint, on respect for sovereignty and international rules, even when the US bent them. Today, those assumptions are collapsing. When American allies warn Washington that they will not stop defending territorial integrity, they are not posturing, they are drawing boundaries. When intelligence sharing is reduced, it is not symbolic, it is defensive. And when foreign leaders speak openly of a breakdown of values with the United States, they are acknowledging a truth many have quietly feared. The partner that helped build the international order is no longer reliably committed to it. This is how trust erodes in global politics. Not with a single dramatic break, but with accumulated shocks. And to understand how we arrived here, we need to go backward before we can look ahead. To understand this rupture, we have to step back not years, but decades. After World War II, the United States didn't just accumulate power. It embedded that power inside rules, institutions, and alliances. NATO, the United Nations, trade regimes, intelligence partnerships. These systems worked because America accepted constraints, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes imperfectly. But allies trusted that Washington valued the system more than any single impulse. That trust became a stabilizing cycle. Allies aligned with the US gained legitimacy. Legitimacy reinforced leadership. But history also teaches us something else. Global orders don't collapse when rivals attack them head-on. They weaken when the leading power stops believing in its own rules. Over time, stress accumulates. Small norm violations become precedents. Exceptional actions become habits. By the time allies begin to hedge, the damage is already done. And now, in 2026, those long-term pressures are colliding with something new, a foreign policy driven less by strategy than by impulse. That collision is about to produce its first visible shock. The first shock didn't come quietly. It came in the form of force and reaction. When the United States launched a military offensive in Venezuela, the expectation in Washington may have been familiar deference. What came instead was condemnation. At an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, even America's closest allies warned that the operation violated the UN Charter and threatened the foundations of international order. That moment mattered, not because the US has never used force controversially before, it has, but because this time, allies did not rationalize it. They did not excuse it. They did not stay silent. Instead, they drew a line. Soon after, the Netherlands announced it would scale back participation in US-led missions in the Caribbean. Britain followed by halting intelligence sharing related to civilian boats. These were not symbolic gestures. They were acts of self-protection. If you're trying to understand global power, this is the detail that matters. Allies don't abandon a leader because of one decision. They withdraw when they no longer trust the system behind the decisions. If this analysis is helping you see the pattern more clearly, stay with me. Because what looks like chaos on the surface is actually something far more structured beneath it. The mechanism behind this shift is not just anger or frustration. It's fear. Fear of what the United States has become. And it's not just fear of one erratic decision, but of a larger, more insidious change. America no longer feels like a predictable partner. It's a shift that many of America's allies are grappling with privately at first, but now increasingly publicly. And it's not just the Trump administration. It's the very way America approaches global leadership in the 21st century. What we're seeing is an unraveling of the post-World War II consensus, the one that said the United States will uphold the system even when it's inconvenient for us. That was the promise, that was the foundation. But now, America's decisions are driven by whims, not rules. It's no longer the guarantor of stability. Instead, it's becoming the cause of instability. As nations like China and Russia have worked for years to destabilize America's alliances, they must be watching this breakdown with a sense of grim satisfaction. Because what used to be the greatest asset of American power, its alliances, is now becoming its greatest vulnerability. This is the quiet cost of erratic leadership. Allies leave not because they don't need the US, but because they fear what the US has become. Countries that used to call the US a trusted partner. When governments move away from Washington, the ripple effects don't just affect diplomats and military strategists. They affect ordinary people too. Look at how this new landscape has already begun to shape lives. Denmark, for example, is scaling back military cooperation in the Caribbean. For Denmark citizens, that could mean less safety from transnational threats like drug trafficking. When Britain halts intelligence sharing with the US, it's not just a political gesture, it's a real shift in how secure British citizens feel. If America can't be trusted with sensitive information, then global threats feel that much closer to home. But the most human effect is this. People start to lose confidence in their country's alliances. They feel less protected, less certain. In an increasingly dangerous world, that can be a powerful blow. And it's not just in the US and Europe. This is global. When America's leadership falters, it's ordinary people everywhere who feel the weight of instability. So what happens next? That's the most pressing question we must answer. The global impact of America's retreat is not just about diminished influence. It's about the ripple effect across every corner of the world. Look at the broader geopolitical landscape. Nations that were once comfortably aligned with the US are no longer sure they can afford to trust America's word. Instead, they're turning to new allies. Germany, France, and the UK are already moving closer to each other. They are negotiating new trade deals. They are strengthening military ties. And yes, they're even coordinating joint sanctions, a clear signal that they're no longer waiting for Washington to lead. In Asia, Japan and South Korea are increasing their defense cooperation, aware that the US may not always be the stabilizing force in the region it once was. And this shift isn't just strategic. It's deeply personal for the leaders involved. They are confronting the reality that their values, the ones that define the post-war order, are no longer being upheld by the very power that built that order. This is not just about trade or defense anymore. It's about the future of global order itself. And with America standing on the sidelines, it's clear. The world is beginning to move on. Let's look ahead, because while the present is precarious, the future is even more uncertain. We're witnessing the early stages of a global realignment. But where is this headed? Let's consider three possible futures. Scenario 1, the best case scenario. America's allies, despite the current challenges, managed to rein in the damage. They reinforced the international system with a new, more balanced approach where American leadership is respected but no longer dominates. Perhaps, over time, Washington finds its way back to multilateralism, restoring trust through new agreements and shared goals. Scenario 2, the middle ground. The US remains an influential but increasingly isolated player on the world stage. Allies continue to hedge, building stronger regional coalitions that are less dependent on American power. This scenario may be less chaotic, but it's still one where global leadership is fragmented and the world is less secure. Scenario 3, the worst case scenario. A world without clear leadership. Nations increasingly go their own way, forming ad hoc coalitions with competing visions of the future. Global instability intensifies, and as trust in America continues to erode, the world slips into a new era of geopolitical chaos. What's clear is this: the systems that have governed us for so long are under intense pressure, and how we navigate these pressures will determine not just the future of alliances, but the future of the international order itself. We have entered an age of uncertainty, and the direction we take will shape generations to come. Now that we've examined where things stand and where they could lead, let's talk about the larger insight that ties all of this together. At the heart of it, what we're seeing is the unraveling of something fundamental. The idea that leadership in the global system comes from the trust and cooperation of nations, not simply from power. America's traditional dominance came from the willingness to lead, not just dictate. For decades, America's allies followed because they believed in the system the US helped build. They believed that even in the most difficult moments, Washington would work within shared rules. But now, the erosion of trust, the fear, the betrayal of norms has made it clear. Trust is the most fragile currency in global politics. This is where we find ourselves today. In a world where the US isn't just losing power, but losing credibility. And yet, here's the hard truth. This isn't just the story of America. It's the story of every great power. It's the same arc: rise, reign, and then the slow, often imperceptible collapse of the systems that once held the world together. This is a call to action not just for policymakers, but for every person who cares about the future of global stability. It's time to confront what America has become and to rebuild before it's too late. This is where I'll leave you for now. Stay with me as we continue this journey. We've come to the final moment of this analysis, and it's not an easy conclusion. For the past several decades, the United States has been the bedrock of global order. But in 2026, that order is cracking under the weight of a new reality. The America that was once seen as the guarantor of peace and stability is now the source of division and chaos. Not because other powers are disrupting the system, but because the US has abandoned its own role in it. This moment is a wake-up call, not just for American leaders, but for the entire world. Because the truth is, the system we've all relied on is fragile, and the erosion of America's leadership is a risk we're all now facing together. What happens next is up to us to decide whether we can pull back from the brink or allow this new chaos to define the future. But one thing is certain: if we don't act, if we don't restore the trust that once made America the leader it was, the world may never be the same. This is a turning point, and it's one that will shape the next chapter of our history. Stay aware, stay engaged, because the decisions we make in the coming years will determine the course of the world for generations to come.